Could you tell us, what's your, have you got a favorite thing that, a favorite story of how a great piece of data has changed the way a brand has acted? What's your favorite one? What are you most proud of?
Okay, so as a consultant, I went into a large bank, we'll leave them nameless, and they wanted some fairly sophisticated price optimization technology using they'd bought an optimization engine, built an in-house tool to try and optimize the price for when people will tip, will people say no or yes at 7.9 or 7.7 or 8.3. And this engine was crunching away, it cost them quite a lot of money, and they had about 14 people working on this kind of process around it, obviously a lot of red tape, it was a bank. And, thank you. And I went in, they were looking for someone to run it, and I just said, what are our fail rates? What ratio? And they said, oh no, we've been doing this for about 12 months. Actually, the question we want to answer is, should it be 7.7 or 7.8, broadly speaking? And I said, but we don't know the fail rate. We don't know what point, we don't record people who don't take an offer with us, because we have to keep the details for all those people who take deals with us. So that's what's in our system. We kind of put that in. I asked the tech guys to put it in. We put it in. The sales guys agreed to record it. And it turned out actually that sales guys were recording it.
But nobody was listening.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So it was very light touch from that end. We put that in. I left it for 3 months. We then started to interrogate it. 6 months later, we brought that in, and that delivered, if I can put it into pounds terms, let's just think what it was. They were previously doing about £300 per deal. It was kind of net present value over the lifetime of the loan. And that went up to about 450 after we put that data into the model.
Brilliant.
It was the same model, the same data people. We didn't do anything differently. We just put one more extra data feed in, and the whole thing changed. But it was data they were taking off the customer. They'd done the hard bit, they'd mined it out the ground, and then just left it in a pile. Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because this thing you were saying about there is an answer to every single question. The problem isn't the data, it's asking the question, isn't it? So the problem is actually what questions to ask. Isn't that the key issue with data?
Yeah, I think it is the key issue for question. I think there's a little bit before, almost to my slide about manageability, is how much do you put in to the quote-unquote system and process that you then ask questions? Because just opening up all the taps, and some guys in the US wrote a book about this. It was about data generally in the modern world that we're in, called Drinking from the Fire Hydrant. And I thought that was a lovely analogy. Is it easy to drink if the tap's more on than not? Yes. But there is a limit there, and very soon that just,
And in Barclays, last one, and then we'll go. In Barclays, are you a service department to, marketing or brand or business? Are people coming to you saying, "Here's the question we want you to answer"? Is that how it works?
Yes, I suppose. Although we are also doing a lot of getting people in rooms, to people who are running the actual business of the marketing and product areas around why is this happening and why are we seeing this? Awkward question. We have at the moment, we have no legitimate power over you, but we can make you cringe in a room. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
Thanks for that, Dan. Right, first question.
Thank you for the wonderful information, Don. Quick question for you in regard to the decision support system.
Sorry, just tell us who you are.
I'm sorry, my name is
I know who you are.
my name is Hisham. I'm actually coming from the U.S., looking at the Kaizen Six Sigma in the financial industry. The question that I wanted to do: there's always a risk in taking decisions. How much for rate that you wanted to make a strategic decision on data, and how much of it would take it from a gut feeling? Just the percentage would be great. 80, 20 data?
Yeah, so first of all, if I can rephrase so that I answer your question probably, because if anyone's out there who's either has employed me or is thinking about previously, no gut feel at all. In terms of experience and intuition, if we can rebrand it, then I'm happy to answer. I think probably the question itself about where we go next is probably 70% intuition and experience, 30% data. I think then answering the question and the answer coming out has to be 80, 90% data, 10% intuition, in the sense of all you can really say is, I've seen these things before, I suspect pretty strongly that the following will happen. I create a test case and a live case, let's run with those, and then to some extent the answer to that empiricism has to be the answer. On the odd occasion, I can think of two that are sensitive. I've said I don't believe those results, let's revisit the question, did the data guys quite do what I did today? 50% hit rate there. Once I was right, once I was just flat wrong. But I think you have to broadly believe the answers, but you have to lead the question, for sure. Yeah.
One more, please. In regard to refreshing the data, to make sure that you take the next strategic perspective on what you want to do next, do you gauge that every 6 months, every 1 year, every 2 years? How do you go about looking back at your data to evaluate what you've done is right? And thank you.
No problem. Thanks before the question is punchy, because I'm not sure what the answer is here. I think you have to take the lead from the broader bank strategy there. I don't think we as analytics can, as the dog's tail, wag the dog. But yeah, it's an interesting reality when CEO changes or large function head changes, and when you were solving previously for X or for customer satisfaction, you're now solving for price per unit, or whatever that may be. But they pay our wages at the end of the day, so we have to just follow that. So I think broad strategy has to follow corporate strategy or business unit strategy or product strategy, wherever we're working within the organization. And you just have to change when they change, because, you know, you can only sail the way the wind's blowing, really. Yeah.
Next question. Any more questions? Okay, I'd just like to ask you both one, and it's kind of this thing about what's the point of data? From as a brand guy asking that question, the point of it has to be, you know, how predictive can it be? And a bit like in our future bank, you know, I'd love for somebody to go online or on their phone or into a branch and answer a few questions, and for you to be able to tell me what their life is going to be like, right? What are they going to do next? Because you know where they go to university, you know where they live, you know, there's all those things that you know. How predictive are we right now? Can we be right now?
So if I take that first, and then I'll give you some time to think. I think one of the problems, to back it up a little bit, is that we often try and validate our models on how predictive were our models. Like, oh no, okay, the crash has happened, but I built a new model. If you run the crash back through this model, we totally saw it coming in 2006. So what a great model this is. And I think that's very dangerous, because the real question is not how predictive have our models been, but actually how predictive will our models be in the future. What questions and actions should we be taking in the future? Because actually, the actions we should have taken in the past are probably the reason why we've got a new CEO and they're shouting a bunch of different questions at us. And I think trying to solve for the problems we missed in the past is an error we're probably not going to learn, as every generation before us hasn't.
So at Barclays, you're not looking in the rearview mirror. You're saying, look, fine, but or are you looking back and think, what really did we do wrong?
Yeah, so I think the answer is the only way to guide the train to go forward is with the data you have and the lights on, so to speak. So we only know where the train's been, so we have to use that information, but be cognizant that we're only looking back to change the future. We're not going to change the past.
Yeah.
And I think that is all. You have to remember that that's the mine. Now, out of the mine, you get diamonds, and that's great, but actually, unless someone buys that in a ring or in a necklace,
yeah,
getting a diamond was not really useful. So I think we have to be cognizant of why we're doing those things. And if I have a problem with banks historically, interested on telecoms here, another large institution, my problem would be that we've all been a little too siloed. I'm solving this question, we're solving this question, we're doing this, we're solving, here's brand here, and here's pricing here, and there's risk here. And actually, the real wealth is when you leverage them all together. So yeah.
It's a very interesting question, because when I joined O2, we built first wave of churn models, which are fundamental for the business. And if you know Gini measure as an accuracy between 0 and 1, and these models were 2 weeks ahead, 4 weeks ahead, and even 8 weeks ahead. So we were predicting the report out event 8 weeks ahead. And,
Right.
and the Gini for these models was 42. Now, then we rolled out another wave of analytics, and so these initial models were built on the, say, 50 columns initially, 50 variables. We brought all this big data into picture, not all, but a lot more. We ended up with 1,600 columns.
Wow.
And the Gini improved to 43.
Right.
So it seems like with certain events, there's a ceiling. And now if I'm thinking about bringing DPI, maybe linking social media, how much will this improve? Probably to 44.
Yeah.
It seems like in nature, there's a certain limit of the accuracy you can get and the data that is out there. And the rest is probably just due to an accident, people just walking by and making decisions because
Right.
they saw a billboard or someone talked them into.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that especially in banks where we need to be 6, 12 months ahead, or at least that's what I'm always being asked for. And I think it's our job who work in analytics to let people know that, you know what, 43, 44 is pretty good. You know, that's about as good as it gets. And that the answer isn't, why can't you build a model for 90? Because if you start trying to force models and use, 90% predictability on analytics, then we're going to fail, and we're going to fail every time. And the strategy guys will just charge over us, and it'll all get changed.
Can I ask you, sorry, I'm just really interested in this. Just as an outsider looking at this, everybody's in data, big data, has been talking about, structured and unstructured, like it's two silos. But as a brand designer, we just want to predict. We just want to look at information and try and understand how people are feeling. And I do get this sense that it is very siloed. I mean, have you got guys, I'll give you a really short story. A friend of mine, his son is just finished a law degree, and he's trying to get a contract with a law firm. And it's really tough in the UK, and he's really trying to do it. And he got rejected from a particular law firm, and he thinks it's because there's a picture on his Facebook page of him kind of a little bit tipsy on a beach with a burning bus in the background. Now, he didn't burn a bus, but this picture of him having fun at a weekend is actually on the thing. Now, he figured I didn't get the job because they looked at my Facebook. So what my son is doing now is taking Facebook and he's got two versions. One for his friends, where he's messing about, and the other for people that are looking for a job. And I suspect the answer is not that. I think the answer is that data people, a bit like HR people, have to get better at looking through the information they're getting. So at one end is what questions are we asking, at the other end is how are we reading them. And I wanted to ask you this, because I figured out, certainly at O2 or Barclays, you'd have a way of not siloing these two really important, structured and unstructured. Why isn't there a new word in data that we use for how these two things are working together?
So, I mean, I don't see it as a black and white. Even within structured, I've got the opening of a mortgage versus, how often within a month that person will come back in to check balances on a savings account. It's kind of semi-structured, and then all the way through, you've got lots of data providers like LinkedIn are very good at creating structure out of seemingly unstructured data, and they do a lot of AI to create that. So I would say that it's far from black and white. Have we solved it? Are there 10 silos rather than the 2 you spoke about? Possibly. But I think we have to leverage that. Otherwise, you can't just say, I've got a quantitative model, give me, are they happy, 1 to 3, and I'll plug it in. That's just not...
I'd like that, actually.
Yeah,
that's what I'm after.
That's not, that's not really the solution here. So, and that's a bit of a problem. You see a lot of people using NPS and creating empiricism behind NPS and saying, well, that Net Promoter Score is now the solution for all our customer service empiricism, and we'll just plug that into the data. So I don't know how the telecoms say they're a few years ahead of us, but I don't see it solved, let's say that, yet. I think there is a problem that you speak about. I don't think it's quite as bad as you say, but
so there might be a new industry emerging, right? Which is that somebody comes up with a name for how you get, structured and unstructured, and find questions and answers from both those sources.
It is, and it's actually within advanced analytics objectives to help to define the right questions.
Right.
Because we know best what can be delivered. But there's something interesting here about how far we can push analytics. when we tried improved accuracy and we went really deep with multi-segmentation, we discovered some highly predictive segments for people who are interested in buying or are interested in leaving. So it works for buying and for leaving quite accurately. But the problem is the people who we predict are very interested in buying, they will buy anyway.
Yeah.
So we will actually waste some money
Yeah.
by contacting them.
Yeah.
People who feel really strongly about leaving, they will leave anyway, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can actually help them because we'll just annoy them by contacting them. So
Gotcha.
it's
I think that plays interestingly to the brand. I don't like this brand. Now this brand's telling me something. Well, you're not going to like it because you've just said you don't like the brand. So I think, it was an interesting story we had on. I first moved into an analytics team in a bank that doesn't exist in its own form now in the UK, and it's they had a predictive power on one marketing campaign where they would send flyers out to prospective new customers or existing customers prospectively to take out loans, and they said that they generated 90% of the loan uptakes through this marketing campaign. It had the best campaign. It was kind of the glory product of why marketing analytics was brilliant. I got brought in as a broader analytics, and I asked them to give me the sample data they were going to mail and only mail 50% of it, and I'll take credit for the other 50%. And I beat them by 2% take-up rate. I mean, they were just mailing, their models were just mailing people who were going to take a loan out anyway to send them a piece of paper so that they could take claim for it. And we just saved about 150,000 a year by just saying, well, let's just not mail them, let them come in anyway. Right. And that's, again, about the question. The question isn't, I've sent them a mail, therefore how likely are they to take it? The question is, if I send them the mail or I don't send them the mail, how much of the real world will I change?
Right. Next question.
I just want to share my sentiments, Don. I mean, precisely, and that's exactly what I've seen. I mean, tons and tons of times. The moment you keep control, which is what you're saying, 50% you didn't mail versus mail, and suddenly you figure out how many campaigns actually work. I mean, precisely. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it came fairly early on in my career, and it's been true of most of the analytics teams I've met who claim to have very good models. And that's a bit to my point before. I don't go in and oversell analytics, because if you are, you're probably not doing it correctly. You're just predicting things that have definitely happened historically.
Right.
And to the point on genies of 40s, I think that's where we should be tapping ourselves on the back, not saying how do we get to 70. Again, depending on what you're predicting here. Some things are much more predictable.
Yeah, of course. Next one. Any more questions? Look, these are the guys that know the answers to every question. It must be one question.
Actually, that's my wife, but she's not here today.
How much of your data do you actually use to cut cost of the operation? Not to predict the future, but actually cut cost.
So I'm not sure if that's at either of us specifically, but from my first slide at the beginning, I think in the last 3 years, and I was a consultant for the first half of that, and of late just at Barclays, I see across the industry two demands on data, and they're about the capital allocation. We now can't have infinite amounts of capital, and how do we do better with that? And I'm excited by that world, and I think the way in which we're going to change that world will be fundamentally different in 10 years from the way it was 10 years back. Sorry, 10 years back, 10 years forward. That said, on costs, I probably get 60% of my questions now around costs and how do we reduce that. Everyone is telling me, no, if you study historically when costs and cost transformation programs have happened within financial services, they basically come within 1 year of any economic crisis. Banks ride the economic wave, with an increased beta. So when it goes down, it goes very bad. Can we increase income at times of depression? No, therefore, or recession. No, therefore, let's cut our costs. Well, what were we even thinking for the last 5 years? And now we've been at the bottom for almost 2 cost cycles. We've all had 18 months to 2 years of cost programs, and we're still not out. We still can't touch income. So let's have another cost program. We've proven that we can take X% out there. Obviously, we can take X% again. And it worries me a little. I think that there's only a few cost lines, and I think we all know what they are, that have any controllability about them. And they are pretty severe. I think we can help those guys. I'm not always sure that the cost analysts that I see at least are great believers in the analysis that can be produced. To your point before, how much of it is gut versus, and I'm going to use gut for those guys rather than experience and intuition, versus the analytics. I think they're pretty heavy on gut, and it's hard to change them, and they're invariably pretty senior, would be my take on it.
Do you feel the same way?
Well, in O2 it worked a bit differently, so we're not asked to drive some cost-saving analytics. It came very strongly as a byproduct. So for instance, on the prepay side, the main retention offer was free call value. So we were calling people and of the high-risk group, and we were offering double your top-up offer. And the thing is, when we introduced the control groups and test and learn and split them 50-50, it was a huge fight. Like, how can we all of a sudden stop offering? We'll lose customers. But we managed to actually do it. Once we've done it, it turned out that it has no retention effect whatsoever. And I use it, we ran it for 3 months, so entire base was just cut in half, and the high risk were targeted, half of them, and the other half was not. So now, whenever there's an operation in progress, we are saying, well, you need to cut it down. First of all this free call value stopped. So that was saving around 2.5 million for whatever was remaining until the end of year. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was just probably last 2 months when we stopped them. But now, whenever there's new retention offer or acquisition offer, it always costs money, and we are saying, let's cut it in half. And they are saying, like, how can we not run it? We'll lose opportunity. We'll say, no. We're going to save the money by not running it to all the customers. If only we can prove that it's working, and it's not just improvement on the sale rate or improvement on the retention rate, there needs to be ROI on it. Then we'll expand this operation. Maybe we'll tweak the product and we'll roll it out to entire base. So that's how it worked.
Thanks.
Maciej, I wanted to share my experience on the whole retention modeling and the use of retention models. Now, one of the things I've seen, and I've seen it umpteen number of times, umpteen number of banks, umpteen number of years. Now, how much ever good your churn model might be, which, let's say the Gini of 42% or whatever, the point is, if you're doing it proactively, the cost of false positives, essentially if you're giving it to, it just never justifies the whole cost part of it. And so at least on the card side or at least on the retail banking side, you always have to do it reactively in a smart manner. Doing a proactive, if you do it in a proactive manner, the cost of the whole false positives would never justify the cost of saving those customers.
It's partially true. So what we are working now on is to avoid subscribers getting into high-risk scores. So now we know when they get to a high-risk score, it's very difficult to retain them. So we are trying to be as far ahead as possible. So we are running into 8-week forward-looking model, maybe more. And then we are working on them quite early. So when I was saying 42, it's for prepay. It's quite hard to predict when the churn will happen. On the postpay models, it's actually much higher. It's 75 around. So, but it's related to the contract status. Like we know, by the end of the contract they will be churning. But it is a very good question. Like it seems like base management who run all these operations thought that customers just have buttons and levers that you can just move around, and they will affect customer behavior. Absolutely not. It's very, very difficult. So we can have all the models in the world. It's still down to marketing campaign and the offer and the message and the tone of voice,
of course
and the perceived value, whether the campaign will work or not. But what you're talking is the bias. Once you roll out the effective campaign, your observed Gini will go down. Now think about it, about application scorecards, how they work, because it's a link to banking. If you run your application scorecard and you see how the customers behave, if you made all the right decisions, the observed Gini should be 0.
Yeah.
But no, Basel II says you need to keep validating on your biased sample, on the people you cherry-picked as the best. And if the scorecard is not performing, being Gini goes down, then you need to build new scorecard, which is just ridiculous.
It's your analytics as well, no doubt, right?
Say that?
You're in analytics as well.
Yes, I mean, I take care of the cards analytics and Emirates NBD. That's correct. Yeah.
All right, dear, brilliant. Great cards. Best in class, probably here. The Emirates MBG happen to be best in the. I want to ask the three of you something, and that's that, you know, the consumers are changing very quickly, right? And a lot of the analytics that you're doing is looking back and using them to predict based on what's happened before. Given that consumers are changing so quickly, how do you factor that into, you know, your learning? Because if you look back and see behaviors, your predictions are only right on the basis that those behaviors aren't changed. But if people are actually changing the way they be, and that's what's happening now, real time for us all. It's the most important thing. People are behaving so differently. So how do you factor that into predicting?
If I may, well, surprisingly enough, for the churn risk models, I don't see it. I built over the last 4 years models for 3 telcos in Ireland, and these models look quite similar. So the patterns we observe in the data are quite the same. The buying behaviors will change. So the usage, especially data usage, will be changing, and we are just trying to validate the models and build them and rebuild them. On the banking side, it's a worldwide problem because we practically had no application mortgages in Ireland for the last 2 or 3 years.
It's true.
And if you look at Basel II, you need to use long-term data, and you can think about patterns that existed 5, 6 years ago. It's not only in Ireland.
Yeah.
They are just totally not applicable to the current market. I believe it's a serious challenge.
Absolutely. And I would say that the current situation that we're in, economically, banking, seeing all that, how powerful that is in predicting the next 3-5 years, Lord only knows. And I think that the importance...
So it makes it less relevant, right?
Well, I think it makes it more relevant, but you need to be sharper on the questions you're asking, because if there's a lot of chaos, then there's more to be won. I would say that, first of all, I don't see people changing. None of our data sees people changing. What we see is generations changing, and that our customer base changes in the fact that more new people come in and other people drop out. And actually, we see those demographics changing, and certainly in the West and the US, how we see that post-World War II baby boom flow through, I think and into retirement, I think is incredibly important for retail banking, and I think it's going to throw a lot of our models out. But I think that while we don't see people changing that much, I think it very much depends on which end in banking you're in. I think to the guy in cards, I think cards change pretty quickly. People are happy to change cards. People aren't happy to change banks. They're happy to whinge, but they're not happy to change banks. And I think to the original question, how good is it and should we use it? I think a decision is only as good as the lifetime of that decision. If I say I want to retain this customer or get this customer, well then it's how long is that customer going to stay with me post-retention or after I get them? Now with an actual banking account, the answer might be 20 years. No way a model's going to live with that. Yeah, well, discuss anymore.
Those days have gone.
Yeah.
Can I ask you the same question? How do you factor that change in?
Okay, technically speaking, again, it's a very technical answer. Now, there are very specific metrics available to figure out if there is a change in the population on which the model was built. And I'm sure Maciej and Dan will collaborate what I'm saying. And Dan, I think, was trying to explain that in simple English. So there's a measure which is called population stability index, for the lack of a better word. So essentially, I mean, you build a model on a particular population on which you make predictions. Let's say the model was made 3 years back. And then you keep on checking, has the population significantly changed versus the population on which the model was built? And typically at least in my experience, what I've seen is, at least on the retail banking models, you would have a shelf life of roughly, at least historically, I mean, going forward, probably it'll be lesser. You're talking 2 to 3 years kind of a thing. And then you will have to tweak the model to get it back in shape.
Fantastic.